200 billion. Okay. So anemia, we did mention this before. Anemia is a condition in which red blood cell count or hemoglobin production is less than normal. Okay? So basically, anytime there's a situation where the body is not able to transport sufficient oxygen. So if you don't have enough red blood cells, you're not transporting enough oxygen. If you don't have enough hemoglobin, but you do have enough red blood cells, you're still what? Not transporting enough oxygen. Right? Why? So let's just say you have an adequate number of red blood cells, but you don't have enough hemoglobin. Are the red blood cells still capable of transporting a normal amount of oxygen? Right, so even though you have enough red blood cells, if you don't have enough hemoglobin, you're still not transporting enough oxygen. And the question is why?
Because oxygen binds to iron, and iron is hemoglobin.
That's it. So we know red blood cells transport oxygen, but the oxygen binds to something specifically, which is on hemoglobin, right? So the hemoglobin has the iron in the center, and oxygen binds to the iron. So you can also say, is it possible to have enough red blood cells and enough hemoglobin, but if you don't have enough iron, can you transport oxygen sufficiently? No, because it's the iron on the hemoglobin that the oxygen binds to. Okay? So anemia can fall into three categories: inadequate erythropoiesis or hemoglobin synthesis. So either of those, if there is insufficient production of red blood cells or hemoglobin, then you're going to have a problem with your blood transporting enough oxygen to the tissues. Hemorrhagic anemia. So what is that? Hemorrhaging. So if you're hemorrhaging, you're losing blood, which is going to include what? Red blood cells. So that would lead to anemia as well. What about hemolytic? Hemolysis, you heard that before? So hemo, blood, but lytic or lysis usually means splitting or breaking down, breaking apart. So you're destroying red blood cells here. So there are conditions where red blood cells are broken down prematurely. We do want to break down roughly 200 billion red blood cells every day. But if you're breaking down more than that, then it's going to lead to a reduction in red blood cell count. Therefore, you're going to lose the ability to transport oxygen. So some causes of inadequate erythropoiesis. So these are just areas you all can go through. Kidney failure, insufficient EPO production. Iron deficiency. So we talked about that iron, you have to have the iron in order for oxygen to bind to the hemoglobin. Inadequate vitamin B12. B12, if there's an insufficient amount of B12, that leads to something called pernicious anemia. And really, vitamin B12 aids in any of our body cells undergoing mitosis. So if you're not getting enough vitamin B12, not only do your other cells not divide as rapidly, these blood cells are the ones we really need to divide so that we can produce 200 billion every day. So that would affect production of red blood cells as well. Hypoplastic anemia and aplastic anemia just have to do with either slowing or cessation of the erythropoietic process. All right, so what? So anemia happens. What are the consequences? What are the results? So first, this one should make sense to you. Tissue hypoxia. You heard that word before. Hypoxia means what? Low oxygen, right? So tissue hypoxia means low oxygen getting to the tissue. So the tissues are not getting enough oxygen. Which tissues? What are we talking about when we say tissues? Right. All of our cells, right. So all of our cells are part of a tissue. So all of our cells need that oxygen. So tissue hypoxia, the liver tissue, the kidney tissue, the heart tissue, the lung tissue, brain tissue, any tissues that are receiving a lower amount of oxygen than normal, which would happen if you have low oxygen in your blood, because the blood is actually what transports the oxygen to those tissues. Okay, so low oxygen to tissues can become so extreme that results in necrosis. What is necrosis? Cell death, right? Tissue death. So if a tissue is not getting adequate oxygen, eventually it's not going to be able to survive, because all cells need oxygen for what purpose? To survive. But what specifically is oxygen doing to make our cells survive? Yeah, you all should know that by now. ATP should be the answer to everything. So, if the cells are not getting the oxygen, they can't make the ATP, the cells die. Okay? So, cell death. Before that, though, your patient may be lethargic, have shortness of breath upon exertion. And then again, since our brain, heart, and kidneys need an abundance of oxygen, if they're not getting it, they start to fail as well. Blood osmolarity is also reduced, producing tissue edema. And that word, I do want you all to have an idea what blood osmolarity is. I'm not sure if this is the main chapter. I know it's going to come back up when we get to fluid electrolyte balance. But for now, whenever you see blood osmolarity, just know that the osmolarity part refers to the concentration of dissolved substances within blood. Okay? An example of that is sodium. So if you consume French fries, and you've dumped salt all over the French fries. When you consume the French fries, the salt goes into your blood. So momentarily, that's going to increase your blood osmolarity. So anytime you have an increase in substances like sodium dissolved in your blood, that increases blood osmolarity. Okay? So it's really the ratio between the amount of dissolved substances that you have in blood. On the flip side, if you consume, just sitting there in 2 minutes, you'd consume a liter or two of water, what is your blood osmolarity going to do? It's going to decrease. So if you dilute your blood, then that's going to decrease osmolarity. Okay? And I'll get more into that later on. I don't want to spend too much time there. Okay. So, and then you also have, again, anemia results in low blood viscosity. Heart races and pressure drops, and that can lead to cardiac failure, heart failure.